Heavy metal's timeline is usually carved out by the megastars, the ones who had it all: fame, fortune, and endless tour dates. But the real pulse of the genre has always come from deeper underground. Their albums still slap, their fans still care. They were the real deal, just out of step with their time. So let's fix that. These are the 20 underrated 70s and 80s heavy metal bands you forgot existed. 1. Sir Lord Baltimore. Picture this. It's 1970, and a power trio from Brooklyn, New York, unleashes a sonic apocalypse so frantic and loud, it feels like it could tear a hole in the fabric of reality. That was Sir Lord Baltimore, with a frontman, John Garner, who was both the drummer and the lead singer, delivering a high-pitched, frenetic wail while performing complex, thunderous fills. They were a whirlwind of unhinged energy. Their debut album, Kingdom Come, was a blistering assault of proto-punk fury, overdriven guitar, and a rhythm section that sounded like it was falling down a flight of stairs in perfect time. They had the aggression, the power, and a sound that was arguably heavier and faster than what Sabbath or Purple were doing at the exact same moment. They were raw, chaotic, and utterly uncompromising. But what people miss is this key detail. A May 1971 review of Kingdom Come in Cream magazine by critic Mike Saunders is widely considered the very first time the term heavy metal ever appeared in print to describe a style of music. They weren't just playing the genre, they were literally the ones who got it named. But like a supernova, their brilliant explosion was tragically brief. A second album that leaned into more complex, multi-part suites confused the few listeners they had gained, and a lack of label support saw them vanish completely for over 30 years. While Sir Lord Baltimore was a flash of New York fury, our next band hailed from Wales and built a career on quirky, inventive riffs that became a secret handshake among metal's biggest titans. 2. Budgie. From the unlikely heavy metal breeding ground of Cardiff, Wales, came Budgie, a power trio with a sound as quirky as their name. For nearly a decade, they churned out album after album of wonderfully inventive, riff-centric heavy metal that became a secret handshake among those in the know. With Burke Shelley's unique high-pitched yelp of a voice and Tony Burge's endlessly creative guitar work, Budgie created a sound that was instantly recognizable. They never wrote a simple song, often weaving together multiple tempos and earth-shaking riffs into a single track, like their iconic Bread Fan. They toured relentlessly and were beloved by a fiercely loyal fan base, especially in their native UK. So why did they remain a cult act? Perhaps they were too eccentric for the mainstream. Their song titles, Nude, Disintegrating Parachutist Woman, Hot as a Doctor's Armpit, and their often whimsical lyrics stood in stark contrast to the serious, epic themes of their peers. The wild part is their influence far outweighs their commercial success. A new generation of metal titans in the 80s cited them as a primary inspiration. Budgie is the ultimate your favorite band's favorite band, a treasure trove of riffs still waiting to be fully appreciated by the masses. Budgie's quirky brilliance was influential, but our next band featured a supergroup lineup that promised progressive hard rock mastery before imploding under the weight of its own talent. 3. Captain Beyond. Visualize a supergroup forged from the ashes of legendary bands destined to create something entirely new. Captain Beyond was exactly that. The lineup was a dream team: vocalist Rod Evans, fresh from being the original singer for Deep Purple, drummer Bobby Caldwell from Johnny Winter's band, and 2 members of the seminal heavy rock act Iron Butterfly. They weren't just a band, they were a progressive hard rock entity whose self-titled debut album is a masterpiece of the genre. The album is a seamless journey, with intricate songs flowing directly into one another, blending heavy, fuzzed-out riffs with complex Latin rhythms and spacey, psychedelic passages. It was musically light years ahead of its time, defying easy categorization. Tracks like Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air showed a level of compositional ambition that few could match. They had the pedigree, the vision, and the musical chops to be absolutely massive. It was supposed to be easy until it wasn't. The band was plagued by internal strife, and what many describe as poor management and promotion from their label, Capricorn Records, which was more focused on Southern rock acts. Rod Evans left after the second album, and the magic was gone, with Evans himself vanishing so completely from the music world that he became one of rock's great unsolved mysteries. From a supergroup that burned out, we turn to a Canadian power trio whose incredible musicianship and spectacular live shows never quite translated into global superstardom. For Triumph, they combined spectacular live shows with exceptional musicianship, yet were perpetually, unfairly, stuck in the shadow of their Canadian progressive rock peers, Rush. That was the story of Triumph. This Toronto-based power trio, consisting of guitarist-vocalist Rick Emmett, drummer-vocalist Gil Moore, and bassist/keyboardist Mike Levine, was a formidable force. Their music was a potent blend of melodic hard rock, progressive arrangements, and anthemic fist-pumping choruses. Their live shows were the stuff of legend. Here's where it all takes a sharp turn. They were one of the first bands to turn rock concerts into massive visual spectacles, with groundbreaking laser shows and enormous pyrotechnic displays that were years ahead of their time. Albums like Allied Forces and Never Surrender were packed with hits like Magic Power and Fight the Good Fight, which dominated rock radio in Canada and parts of the US. Rick Emmett was a phenomenal guitarist, equally adept at blistering hard rock solos and delicate classical passages, and the dual vocal attack of Emmett and Moore gave them a dynamic range few bands could match. Despite significant success, including multiple platinum albums, global recognition on the level of a Rush or even a Judas Priest surprisingly stayed just out of reach, leaving them as one of the most successful yet strangely underrated bands of their era. Triumph's lasers lit up arenas, but our next band's frontman lit up stages with a theatricality that rivaled Alice Cooper, all while fronting a seriously skilled metal machine. 5. Lizzie Borden. With a name taken from the infamous accused axe murderer, Lizzie Borden was destined to be a band that embraced theatrical shock rock. But at first it looked harmless, but behind the guillotines, the fake blood, and the ghoulish stage antics was a seriously talented American heavy metal band. Fronted by the charismatic and theatrically named Lizzie Borden himself, born Gregory Hargis, the band combined the glam metal aesthetic of Motley Crue with the twin guitar attack of Iron Maiden and the storytelling of Alice Cooper. Their debut album, Love You to Pieces, was a solid slab of classic metal, but it was their live shows that became legendary. The band's performances were carefully crafted spectacles of horror and rock, drawing both acclaim and controversy. These over-the-top antics, however, often overshadowed the exceptional musicianship of the band, particularly the powerful guitar work of Gene Allen and the soaring, high-pitched vocals of Borden. Songs like Me Against the World in American metal were powerful, well-crafted anthems that stood on their own merit. Yet, like many bands who embraced a strong gimmick, they struggled to be taken seriously as musicians, and as the glam scene faded, they found themselves without a musical home, their legacy unfairly reduced to their shocking stage show. Lizzie Borden embraced horror, but our next band burst onto the scene with pure, unadulterated, Van Halen-esque energy before their star faded with bewildering speed. 6. Bullet Boys. Bursting onto MTV with a charismatic, swaggering frontman and a sound that drew heavily from the party rock kings of the 80s, Bullet Boys seemed destined for prolonged success. Their self-titled debut album was a smash hit, fueled by the monster single Smooth Up in Ya. The song's catchy riff, infectious chorus, and a music video that was in constant rotation made the band instant stars. Frontman Mark Torian had the look, the moves, and the voice, drawing frequent and favorable comparisons to David Lee Roth. You might think that's all, but wait. The connection to Van Halen was more than just stylistic. The album was produced by Ted Templeman, the legendary producer who had helmed all of the classic Van Halen albums, giving their debut an impeccable radio-ready sheen that set them apart from many of their peers. For a moment in 1988, you couldn't escape the Bullet Boys. They had everything going for them, a hit album, a charismatic frontman, and the backing of a legendary producer. But their follow-up albums failed to capture the same magic, and internal strife, combined with the rapidly changing musical landscape, caused them to fade from the spotlight almost as quickly as they had arrived, leaving many fans puzzled by their swift disappearance. The Bullet Boys' swagger was undeniable, but our next band, a Canadian institution, crafted simple, fist-pumping anthems that became rock radio staples, yet they remained largely a national treasure. 7 Helix. Gimme an R. O. C. K. What's that spell? Rock. It was a question with an obvious answer, a call and response so simple and effective, it was destined to become a stadium-chanting classic. For the Canadian hard rock veterans Helix, their anthem Rock You was the culmination of nearly a decade of hard work. The song from their album Walkin' the Razor's Edge was a pure, unadulterated blast of fist-pumping energy. It wasn't complex, it wasn't profound, but its driving riff and irresistible chorus were the perfect distillation of the rock and roll spirit. The music video became an MTV staple, and the song propelled Helix to their highest level of international success. They were already heroes in their native Canada, but Rock You put them on the map across the United States and Europe. The album became their most successful release, and for that moment, they were living the rock and roll dream they were singing about. And then came the part nobody expected. The band's signature anthem almost didn't happen. Executives at their record label initially rejected the song, considering it too simple and stupid. The band insisted, and it went on to become the song that would define their entire career, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. However, they were never able to replicate that level of success outside of Canada. Subsequent albums had strong material, but failed to produce a song with the same universal crossover appeal, leaving them as a beloved but ultimately underrated act on the world stage. Helix kept it simple, but our next band was a supergroup of British legends whose blues-infused hard rock was a critical hit, but a commercial near miss. 8. Fastway. What do you get when Fast Eddie Clarke, fresh from his legendary run in Motorhead, joins forces with UFO bassist Pete Way? You get Fastway, a powerhouse band that blended hard-hitting riffs with bluesy swagger, creating a sound built for massive crowds. Teaming up with the unknown but incredibly charismatic Irish vocalist Dave King, they burst onto the scene with a fantastic self-titled debut. Their sound was more polished and melodic than Motorhead's raw fury, but it still packed a serious punch. Sharing the stage with legends like AC/DC, they delivered electrifying performances that left audiences wanting more. Their biggest hit, Say What You Will, from their second album All Fired Up, became an MTV staple, a perfect 80s rock anthem with a massive chorus. The real shocker was still to come. Despite the pedigree, the hit song, and the critical acclaim, the band's lineup proved incredibly volatile. Pete Way left before the first album was even recorded. While the band continued, lineup shuffles and a shifting musical direction caused them to lose their initial momentum. They never managed to produce another hit with the same impact, and by the late 80s, their moment had passed. In a truly unexpected second act, frontman Dave King would later find massive success in a completely different genre, forming the popular Celtic punk band Flogging Molly. Fastway was a supergroup that splintered, but our next band was a supergroup that never even got to form properly, leading to one of the rawest American hard rock albums of the 70s. 9. Cactus. Often called the American Led Zeppelin, Cactus was a blues rock and hard rock powerhouse with a pedigree that was second to none. The band was originally conceived as a supergroup featuring the rhythm section of the Jeff Beck Group, bassist Tim Bogert and drummer Carmine Appice, along with Jeff Beck himself and vocalist Rod Stewart. But then something totally unexpected happened. A car accident took Beck out of commission for over a year, and Rod Stewart joined Faces. Instead of waiting, Bogert and Appice recruited vocalist Rusty Day and guitarist Jim McCarty to form Cactus. What they created was pure, high-octane boogie rock on steroids. Their first 3 albums, Cactus One Way or Another and Restrictions, are masterclasses in energetic, tightly wound, heavy rock. The interplay between Bogert and Appice was legendary, a rhythm section that was simultaneously a lead instrument. They were faster, groovier, and more raucous than many of their contemporaries, delivering electrifying live shows that left audiences breathless. However, the band's combustible energy also applied to their internal relationships. The classic lineup burned brightly but quickly, dissolving after just 3 years. While they never achieved the stadium-filling fame of Zeppelin, their influence can be heard in everyone from Van Halen to King's X, a true unsung pillar of American hard rock. Cactus was a whirlwind of boogie, but our next band was a glam rock act with a major league producer that somehow missed the superstar goal line. 10. Black and Blue. With their blend of glam rock hooks, radio-friendly anthems, and the backing of legendary producer Gene Simmons of Kiss, Black and Blue seemed like a surefire success. Hailing from Portland, Oregon, they moved to Los Angeles and quickly became a hot commodity on the Sunset Strip. Their high-energy performances, slick stage presence, and MTV-ready appeal gave them all the makings of a breakout act. Their 4th album, In Heat, was even produced by the master of hard rock polish, Bruce Fairbairn, right after he finished work on Bon Jovi's world-conquering Slippery When Wet. From the outside, it seemed simple until you dig deeper. Despite their relentless touring, solid songwriting, and connections to rock royalty, superstardom remained out of reach. Timing, label politics, and the incredibly crowded glam metal scene meant they never quite got the push they needed to break into the mainstream. They were one of the first bands to use MTV to their advantage, with flashy music videos that caught the eye of rock fans but never quite translated into widespread album-selling success. Interestingly, guitarist Tommy Thayer would later find the fame that eluded him in Black and Blue by replacing Ace Frehley in Kiss, bringing the band's story full circle. Black and Blue had the hooks, but not the luck. Our next band had the riffs and the power, but were unfairly dismissed as imitators, a curse that kept them from their throne. 11. Kingdom Come. When Kingdom Come arrived on the scene, the comparisons were immediate, overwhelming, and ultimately career-defining. With their blues-based, riff-heavy sound and the powerful, soaring vocals of frontman Lenny Wolf, critics and fans immediately labeled them as a Led Zeppelin clone. Their debut album was a massive success, shipping gold before the band even toured, fueled by the hit single Get It On. For a moment, they were the biggest new band in rock, packing arenas with fans who were hungry for their Zeppelin-esque sound. And right when it seemed like the end of the road for classic rock sounds, Kingdom Come brought it back in a huge way. But this blessing was also their curse. The Kingdom clone label, pushed heavily by the press, created a backlash that the band could never shake. It overshadowed their undeniable talent and the quality of their songwriting. While the similarities were obvious, there was also a unique, melancholic, and distinctly German quality to their music that was all their own. Picture-packed arenas passionately singing along. It happened, but the controversy and accusations of imitation prevented them from fully claiming the throne they perhaps deserved. They released several more excellent albums, but could never escape the shadow of the band they were accused of copying. Kingdom Come was haunted by the ghost of Zeppelin, but our next band was haunted by a name that promised horror and a sound that delivered so much more. 12. Angel Witch. From the heart of the new wave of British heavy metal came Angel Witch, a band that blended the speed of Motorhead, the prog rock ambition of Rush, and the dark occult themes of Black Sabbath into a sound that was completely their own. Their self-titled debut album is considered an absolute, undisputed classic of the genre. Led by the unique vision of guitarist and vocalist Kevin Hayborn, the album is a masterpiece of dynamic, riff-centric metal. The title track, Angel Witch, is one of the most iconic songs of the entire NWOBHM, a perfect blend of a catchy, driving riff and a soaring, memorable chorus. Nobody saw this coming, but despite creating one of the genre's most beloved debut albums, the band was plagued by almost comical misfortune. Lineup instability was constant, with members leaving to join other, more successful bands. Their record deal fell apart, and they were dropped by their label shortly after the album's release. They were a band that had all the talent and a classic album to their name, but could not catch a break. They broke up, reformed, and broke up again. Their career a frustrating series of stops and starts that prevented them from building on the brilliant foundation of their debut. For those in the know, however, Angel Witch remains a cornerstone of the NWO BHM, a treasure trove of incredible riffs and proto-speed metal power. Angel Witch was a victim of bad luck, but our next band was a victim of being too good, a supergroup whose individual members were simply too in demand to stay together. 13. Trapeze. Before Glenn Hughes became the voice of rock in Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, he was the bassist and lead singer for a criminally underrated power trio from the UK called Trapeze. Alongside guitarist Mel Galley and drummer Dave Holland, Trapeze crafted a unique and soulful blend of hard rock, funk, and R&B that set them apart from virtually everyone else. Their album, You Are the Music, We're Just the Band, is a masterpiece of this hybrid sound. Hughes's soaring, multi-octave vocals were, of course, the star of the show. But the band's power was in their incredible chemistry. They were a ridiculously tight live unit, able to lay down a heavy, driving riff 1 minute and then slip into a slinky funk groove the next. Songs like Black Cloud and Way Back to the Bone showcased a band that could rock with the best of them, but with a depth of soul and rhythm that was truly unique. It all boils down to this one twist. Their downfall was, ironically, their own immense talent. In 1973, Glenn Hughes was headhunted by Deep Purple, one of the biggest bands in the world, an offer he couldn't refuse. While Trapeze continued with other members, the magic of that original trio was gone. Both of Hughes's bandmates would also go on to join metal royalty. Mel Galley would later join Whitesnake, and Dave Holland would become the longtime drummer for Judas Priest. Trapeze was a veritable breeding ground for legends, a band so talented that its members were simply too good to stay together. Trapeze was a breeding ground for legends. Our next band was an American powerhouse that simply got lost in the shuffle, despite creating some of the most heartfelt hard rock of their time. 14. Y&T. For decades, Y&T, originally Yesterday and Today, has been one of the most beloved and consistently excellent hard rock bands to come out of America. Hailing from the Bay Area, they were contemporaries of bands like Montrose, and they built a reputation for their passionate, high-energy live shows and the incredible guitar work and soulful vocals of frontman Dave Meniketti. They had powerful riffs, passionate performances, and hit-worthy songs. Albums like Earthshaker and Black Tiger are packed with some of the best hard rock of the early 80s. Hits like Summertime Girls dominated rock stations regionally, and their live shows were legendary among their dedicated fan base. You won't believe what came next. Despite all the ingredients for success, and despite being adored by fellow musicians like Metallica and Motley Crue, they never quite achieved lasting global recognition on the level of their peers. Like many bands of their era, they were hit hard by the grunge explosion, but their inability to break through to the top tier remains one of hard rock's great mysteries. They remain one of the most respected and hardest working bands in rock, beloved by loyal followers who will passionately argue that they deserved much, much greater acclaim. Y&T deserved more acclaim, but our next band was a progressive rock powerhouse that achieved massive success overseas, but remained a bafflingly overlooked cult act in the United States. 15. Saga. Progressive rock meets pop sensibilities with a healthy dose of sci-fi and complex musical arrangements. That was Saga, a Canadian band that combined the intricate musicianship of Yes with the futuristic keyboard sounds of the new wave and the punch of hard rock. They achieved massive popularity in Europe, particularly Germany, and in Puerto Rico, where they were stadium-filling superstars. Their albums were often complex concept pieces with a series of songs spread across multiple albums known as The Chapters, which told a sci-fi story about a young man who discovers an alien civilization. Everything changed in one moment when their single, On the Loose, with its groundbreaking synthesizer riffs and catchy chorus, became an early MTV staple. This exposure should have been their ticket to stardom in the US. Yet, despite their innovation, catchy songs, and visual appeal, mainstream American fame never fully arrived. They remained a hidden gem for American prog fans, a band whose massive international success was a strange secret in the world's biggest music market. Their legacy is one of a band that was simultaneously a superstar and a cult act, depending on which side of the Atlantic you were on. Saga was a tale of two continents. Our next band introduced the world to one of metal's most iconic female voices, yet struggled to find a foothold in the mainstream. 16. Warlock. Fronted by the charismatic and powerful vocalist Doro Pesch, the German band Warlock was a formidable force in 80s heavy metal. They introduced the world to a true powerhouse frontwoman who could command a stage with the same presence and intensity as any of her male counterparts. With their classic album, Triumph in Agony, featuring the anthems All We Are and Für Immer, Warlock seemed poised for a major international breakthrough. They toured with giants like Judas Priest and Megadeth and had a dedicated fan base around the world. The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because despite the hits, the tours, and Doro's undeniable star power, mainstream success in the lucrative American market strangely eluded them. Legal troubles with their former manager led to Doro losing the rights to the name Warlock. Forced to continue her career under her own name, she lost the brand recognition the band had built. However, her impact on female-fronted metal cannot be overstated. She was one of the first women to win the German Metal Hammer Award, proving her influence extended far beyond Warlock's initial run. She remains an influential and beloved figure in rock today, proof that true talent endures even when faced with industry roadblocks. Warlock's frontwoman became an icon, but our next band was an icon of a different sort, a symbol of perseverance in the face of near-total obscurity. Anvil. Before their acclaimed documentary, Anvil, the story of Anvil, brought them a new level of fame and recognition in the 2000s, this Canadian band was the ultimate rock and roll tragedy. In the early 80s, Anvil was at the forefront of the burgeoning speed metal scene. Their album Metal on Metal is a certified classic, a powerful, influential record that showcased their unique blend of Sabbath-esque heaviness and Motorhead-esque speed. They played major festivals alongside bands like Scorpions and Whitesnake, and they were cited as a primary influence by a new generation of thrash metal titans, including Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. Lars Ulrich of Metallica has famously recounted seeing Anvil live and being blown away. And then everything flips upside down. Despite influencing some of the biggest bands in the world, a string of bad business decisions, poor management, and sheer bad luck left Anvil in complete obscurity for decades. While the bands they inspired went on to sell millions of records, Anvil was left playing to small crowds in local bars, their members working day jobs to support their families. Their story, so powerfully told in their documentary, is a symbol of perseverance, passion, and the often cruel randomness of rock and roll success. They never forgot who they were, even when the world had forgotten them. Anvil's story is one of perseverance, but our next band was one of pure potential, a group of teenagers who crafted one of hard rock's most perfect debut albums before simply disappearing. 18. Dust. Picture a band of teenagers from Brooklyn, barely out of high school, crafting music with the technical proficiency and compositional maturity of seasoned veterans. That was Dust, featuring Mark Bell, who would later become the legendary Marky Ramone on drums, Kenny Aronson on bass, and the prodigiously talented Richie Wise on guitar and vocals. Dust was a hard rock power trio with a shockingly heavy and sophisticated sound. In just 2 years, they released 2 phenomenal albums, their self-titled debut and Heart Attack. Their music was a potent brew of proto-metal, bluesy swagger, and an almost progressive level of musicianship. They had the chops to stand toe-to-toe with any of the British greats, and their album art, created by the legendary fantasy artist Frank Frazetta for Heart Attack, gave them a fantasy metal aesthetic years before it became a staple. Just when it all seemed figured out and they seemed poised for a long career, the band simply dissolved. It was a classic case of being too young, too soon. The members were pulled in different directions after high school, and with little promotional push from their label, they disbanded in 1972. The story doesn't end there, though. Richie Wise and Kenny Kerner, their producer, would go on to produce the first two multi-platinum albums for Kiss. Embedding Dust's DNA in one of rock's most iconic acts, Dust's members went on to shape rock history from behind the scenes. Our next band was a mystery wrapped in an enigma, a band that seemed destined for glory before fading into rock and roll lore. 19. Icon. Visualize leather jackets, roaring guitars, and a band destined for greatness. Icon, from Phoenix, Arizona, had the grit, the power, and the songs to stand alongside legends like Kiss and Motley Crue. Their live performances were electrifying, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who saw them. Their second album, Night of the Crime, produced by the legendary Bob Rock, is hailed by fans as an underrated masterpiece, a perfect blend of melodic hooks and driving, powerful riffs. Songs like On Your Feet and Rock My Radio were tailor-made for arenas. At first it looked harmless, but despite their raw energy and undeniable talent, widespread fame remained just out of reach. The classic story of a record label that didn't know how to promote them, coupled with the arrival of the grunge scene, kept them from breaking through to the next level. In a final desperate move, the band even changed their name and sound, but the magic was gone. Their devoted fan base, however, has kept their legacy alive for decades through dedicated online communities, a testament to a band that had everything it took to be massive, but was denied by the cruel whims of the music industry. Icon was a classic case of what could have been, but our final band presents an even more baffling puzzle. A group that achieved massive, historic success right out of the gate, only to similarly fade from the top tier. 20. Zebra. Imagine blasting out of the gate with one of the fastest-selling debut albums in the history of Atlantic Records, a record label that was home to Led Zeppelin. That was the reality for the New Orleans-based power trio, Zebra. Their self-titled debut was a smash hit, going gold and spawning rock radio staples like Tell Me What You Want and Who's Behind the Door. Their sound was a unique and ambitious blend of Rush's progressive arrangements, the vocal harmonies of Queen, and the hard rock power of Led Zeppelin. They had it all: incredible musicianship, complex songwriting, and the powerful, soaring vocals of frontman Randy Jackson. What people miss is this key detail. Their music videos were staples on early MTV, and they were selling out theaters across the country. They were, for all intents and purposes, the next big thing. And yet, like so many others, they couldn't sustain the momentum. Their follow-up albums, while musically strong, failed to produce a hit single on the level of their debut. Critics often unfairly dismissed them as imitators of their influences. And by the mid-'80s, the musical landscape had changed. They faded from the national spotlight, becoming a beloved cult act known for their incredible live performances. Their story is a puzzling and cautionary tale of how a band can have a massive, explosive start and still end up as a forgotten gem of a bygone era.